Hi there, this is Pablo Requena, guitar maker, and in this video we're going to see a few little details about cutting back the epoxy resin that we use for filling the grain. So when it comes to fill the grain in a guitar, before we prepare it for polishing, it's very important that all rosewoods or other timbers that are of the type that have got very open grain, the grain needs to be properly filled up before we can polish. That way the French polish later on, it will look super flat and like a mirror. So it's very important to take the time to prepare your guitar really well before we start polishing the instrument itself. So what I'm going to show you is there's a few ways in which you can do this job. You can fill the grain using a very traditional technique, which is using pumice powder together with a little bit of oil and with a little bit of polish, and you can use that to cut the wood itself, and that way create like a slurry, a paste that you're going to use as a grain filler. The powder itself is not the grain filler, it's just the cutting agent. And then there's also grain fillers that you can buy in specialized shops where you can get just the right color for the timber that you're polishing. That's also really very suitable. The one that I like using the most is using epoxy resin, because it gives you lots of really good advantages in terms of sealing the grain, but also fixing any minor superficial cracks that the timber might have sometimes. It doesn't happen often, but from time to time you're polishing an instrument, and once you're coming towards the end of the polishing process, you find that actually there's like a hairline crack that is very superficial. It doesn't go through and through into the wood, but nevertheless the polish never takes well and it will always show up, and it's really annoying because then you really have to remove the polish in that area, fix that situation, and then polish again. It really is a bit of a hassle. So using epoxy resin to fill the grain, you really remove this problem. But the other reason why I really like it is because epoxy resin dries as a result of a chemical reaction, and when it dries, it doesn't shrink. So basically what it means is that once you cut back all the resin from the surface, so that you just leave the amount of resin left over in the pores, that little bit of resin that is left over in the pore is not going to shrink, which means that later on, once you've done the polishing job, the grain is not going to open again, which that is quite a common result when you use conventional grain fillers like the pumice powder or just conventional water-based grain fillers. So that's another reason why using epoxy resin is a really, really good idea. There are some timbers that actually also have, like some Brazilian rosewoods, city coats. Sometimes they can have quite deep cracks as well. So I've been in a situation where I've built guitars where everything seemed to be perfect, and then as soon as I put in the epoxy resin, inside I can see like a very, very thin line of resin. So it means that actually it did go through and through. So for some timbers, it's a really good way of stabilizing the wood. So having said all of that, I'm going to show you what I've done so far. So if you come around this way, I'm in the process of polishing a couple of guitars, and what I've just done is to apply 2 coats of epoxy resin in the rosewood. And the way I do this is that I only put a few drops of the resin once it's mixed, and with a scraper, with a plastic scraper, I spread it really, really thin, and I remove as much as I can off the surface. And I do that twice to make sure that it's going to cover everything really well, and that I'm not going to have areas where the grain is still a little bit open. So what that means is that here there is as little resin as there can be, but I do it very carefully so that I don't get all the way up to the heel. So in here you can see how there is a little bit of rosewood showing, because if I get the rosewood all the way into the heel, it will really darken the color of the cedar in the heel, and I don't like that. So That way I make sure that I avoid marking the heel, and then I'll have to do, if that was the case, yes, you can clean it up, but then you're going to have another job in your hands to do a lot of sanding to remove that. And then I'm also very careful not to get any in the soundboard. The soundboard I still need to do quite a bit of cleaning, but I will do that once I've done all the sanding, because this is going to generate quite a bit of dust, and I don't want to have this completely clean yet. I will do that when I've done all the sanding in the back. So here, basically now we need to start removing pretty much all the resin that is in the surfaces, so that we just leave the very small amount of resin that is necessary to go in the pores of the wood. So I'm going to show you that on this other guitar. So I'm going to put this one out of the way. So that is what I have been doing in this one here. So on the side you can see I still got the shine of the resin, but on the back in this one I have now just finished removing all the resin, and basically you can see that there's no shine whatsoever. Everything is absolutely flat, but I don't know how I will show in the video, but you know, having it in front of me, I can see that the grain, it's really very well filled, and there's no bits of open grain at all, and everything is really ready to go. So one thing that you need to do is, you know, it's a little bit tedious to do all the sanding, but it really is worth doing, because then when it comes to polishing the guitar, it's just going to be so much easier. So I've started doing the sanding in this side, and this is a job that you probably want to do with a mask, because you don't want to be breathing this stuff if you can avoid it. But I'm just going to show you a little bit about how I do this. Some people have been asking me what kind of grades of sandpaper I can use and so on. So you can, you know, there's different ways of doing this job, but this is what I do. I use first a small block. This block is about 25 millimeters wide by about 40. It doesn't need to be very big. And it's made of cork, and I like cork because it's kind of quite hard, but it's not as hard as if it was a block of wood. So it's not really gonna gouge in any corners into the wood or anything like that. So I start with a piece of 180 sandpaper, and I cut it to fit the shape of the block that I use. And basically, and let me remove that dust. What we're going to do is to start cutting. You can do circles, or you can go with the grain, but to start with I like doing circles. So in here you can see immediately you got high spots, which is where the surface is going white and matte completely very quickly. So you can see where the high spots are, which are the buildups of resin. And eventually, basically, we're going to focus a little bit on lowering those areas first, and then eventually we're going to get to a point like closer to what we got here, where everything is absolutely matte and there's no shiny spots. So when there's no shiny spots, then what it means is that the surface then is flat. But that is not good enough. That would be great. It's good to have a flat surface, and we are aiming for that. But we are aiming to remove all the resin off the surface, because I already made a mistake years ago of thinking that French polish would stick to anything, and you know, some people claim that that is the case, and that it's possible to apply polish to pretty much any surface. But actually, let me just clean my hand. But actually I found that it doesn't really work so well if we allow to have a flat surface with resin. So don't be tempted to flatten everything down and leave a coat of resin and then polish on top, because what will happen is that, or that's happened to me in the past, that the polish as it dries, it separates from the resin and then it flakes off, and of course that is going to be an issue. in that case, what I had to do, I had to go back to the guitar and remove all the resin and then start doing the polishing without any resin in the surface, and then it went fine. So that you know, don't be tempted to just thinking, oh, it's super flat, I can polish now, but I wouldn't do that. So basically the idea is that you're going to carry on working on the surfaces, keeping everything super flat, and while you got resin here, you're going to have white dust coming out. This is the resin that you're cutting, but eventually you're going to start getting a little bit of pink, which means that you are actually then cutting the wood. So that's where you need to start being careful. And what you need to do is to back off of the areas where you're getting a little bit of pink and keep working only on the areas where you remain or where you keep getting white dust. So what it means is that you're working on the areas where the resin is producing white dust, and then when that area starts producing pink dust, then it means that you've gone through all the resin and now you're starting to cut the wood, to the point that when everything is producing pink everywhere, then you can go into doing a final clean through the grades with different sandpapers. So once I've done all of that with 180, then I start cleaning with 240, then 320 and 400. And basically the idea is that as you end up cutting with 400, there is no white at all coming out. This is just rosewood dust. So you want to be careful not to go too far. With 400, it's not like you're going to open the grain again, but you know, conceivably you could do that. So once you get to a point where you're not getting any more white dust and it's always red or brown from the rosewood, then you know that you got to the point where the only resin left in here is the resin that is filling the grain, and that's where you want to leave it. So that way what we achieve is a super flat surface with no pores whatsoever, which means that now I'm ready. Well, I have to do a lot of sanding still in this guitar, but also on the sides of this one. The flat of the back, in a way, is the easiest area to sand back and to cut back, but it's always kind of a good idea to start on the back here. So this is what it will look like, and this is now ready to start with the French polish process, which I will do when the guitar is completely clean and everything ready to go. But that's what I wanted to show you, just so that you get an idea of, you know, how far and how to remove the resin that you use on the guitar to fill the grain. So I hope that you find this video helpful, and until the next one.